The pharmacist at the Juravinsky Cancer Center called me over to the window, like she had something personal to say, and I suppose she did. Mr. Tanner, I'm sorry to tell you this. The lenalidomide isn't on the Ontario Drug Benefit Formulary yet. It's going through the review process. Until it's approved, it's a private pay prescription. She slid a paper across the counter. I looked at the number at the bottom, $2,800, for 1 month. I stood there in the corridor of the Juravinsky, fluorescent lights humming above me, and I did the math in my head the same way I'd done it for 35 years on the floor at Stelco, quickly, practically, without room for error. My CPP and OAS combined came to just over $2,200 a month. My Stelco pension added another $1,400. Comfortable enough, I'd always thought. Until that paper. I pulled out my phone and called my son. He answered on the second ring. I could hear celebration in the background. Voices, laughter, the particular sound of a room that cost money just to stand in. Dad, his voice was bright, distracted. Hold on a sec. I waited, watched a nurse wheel an elderly woman past me in a chair. The woman looked at me the way people in hospitals do, with that quiet recognition that we were all here for some version of the same reason. Sorry, my son came back on the line. We're doing drinks for the partnership announcement. Junior partner, Bay Street, it's finally official. I told him congratulations, I meant it. Then I told him about the prescription. He went quiet for a moment. In the background, someone called his name. 2,800, he repeated. That's just the first month, I said. While I wait for ODB approval, could take 6 months, could take 9. Dad, listen. His voice shifted, became careful, measured. The voice I'd heard him use in the one courtroom visit I'd ever made, watching him argue emotion, professional, controlled. The timing is not great right now. We just bought the cottage up in Muskoka last spring, and Elena's catering business is still finding its feet, and the new office costs. I'm not asking about your expenses, son. Silence. Then his wife's voice closer to the phone. Mason, they're waiting. Look, he said, can we talk about this next week? I'll see what I can do. The prescription needs to be filled before Thursday. Thursday? He exhaled slowly. Dad, I just can't make that happen right now. Everything is tied up. We're not exactly liquid at the moment. Junior partner at a Bay Street firm, Muskoka Cottage, not liquid. I understand, I said. Because what else do you say to your son when the room behind him sounds like that? The line went quiet, and then it just ended. No goodbye. Just silence, and then the regular nothing of a call that wasn't dropped but might as well have been. Hello everyone, and welcome. Before we go any further, I'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe to stay connected with more stories like this. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love hearing from you. Quick note, this story blends real-life lessons with some fictional elements for educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or places is coincidental, but the message carries truth worth hearing. My name is Clifford Tanner. Cliff, to anyone who's ever known me. I'm 67 years old, and I spent 35 years on the floor at Stelco in Hamilton, what they called ArcelorMittal by the time I retired, though the men and the heat and the noise were all the same as they'd ever been. I was a union steward for 12 of those years. Local 1 now and 5. I believed then, and I believe now that the only reason working men stay whole is because they look out for each other. My wife Marie passed from ovarian cancer when my son was 23 and my daughter was 16. She was 51 years old. After she died, I raised my daughter through high school alone, drove her to track practice 3 mornings a week, sat through every parent-teacher meeting in a room full of couples, and I drove my son the 3 hours round trip to Osgoode Hall in Toronto every weekend of his first year, until he got settled and didn't need the ride anymore. I sold my '94 Camaro to cover the tuition gap in second year. He was going to be a lawyer. That meant something to both of us. He became one. He married a woman named Elena, whom I've met perhaps 6 times over 8 years. They live in a condo in Liberty Village that I've visited twice. I stopped being invited to dinners after I wore my steel-toe boots to their place once, and someone's girlfriend made a face at them. My daughter, on the other hand, lives 20 minutes from me on the east end of Hamilton. She works the breakfast and lunch shift at a diner on Barton Street and picks up office cleaning contracts 3 evenings a week. She has a daughter named Ivy who is 9 years old, whose father decided years ago that he wasn't interested in being a father. My daughter does not complain about this. She is made of the same material her mother was, dense, strong, quiet about it. When I got home from the Juravinsky that afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I looked at my bank account on my phone. I looked at the paper from the pharmacist. I thought about calling my son again. I thought about what he'd said about liquidity, about the cottage, about timing. I thought about the Camaro. Then my phone rang. It was my daughter. Dad. Her voice was careful the way it gets when she already knows something. I heard about the prescription. Mrs. Pellegrino at the clinic used to play euchre with Mom. She called me. It's being handled, I said. How much? I told her. There was a pause. Did you call Mason? I didn't answer right away. Dad. He's got a lot on right now. The partnership, the cottage. She made a sound I'd never heard from her before. Not quite anger. Something older than anger. I'll come by tonight, she said, after my shift. I told her she didn't have to. She'd already hung up. She arrived at 9:30. Her diner uniform was still on under her coat. She was carrying a white envelope, and her hands were shaking slightly, though I don't think she wanted me to notice that. Sit down first, I said. I'm not sitting down. She held out the envelope. This is not why I told you, I said. I know. Take it anyway. I opened it. Ones and fives and a handful of 20s folded carefully. The kind of money that accumulates one table at a time. I counted it slowly, $1,100. Tips from a woman who cleaned offices at 9 in the evening after a full shift on her feet, who had a daughter whose skates were second-hand and whose hockey helmet was a size too big. I couldn't say anything for a moment. You drove Mom to every single appointment, my daughter said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. You slept in the waiting room at Hamilton General the night she went into surgery. You never once asked anyone for a single thing. This money is for Ivy's hockey, I said. Ivy can play recreational. You can't skip chemotherapy. She sat down across from me. Please, Dad. She stayed for an hour. We drank tea and didn't talk about my son. 2 days later, Bruno Ferrara showed up at my door. Bruno and I had worked the same section of the number 3 furnace for over 20 years. He was 62, still on the floor, one of the last holdouts before his own retirement in the spring. He was a big man with a salt and pepper mustache and a handshake that could straighten rebar. He handed me a bank envelope without any preamble. Word got out, he said. The guys took up a collection. Brotherhood fund. Don't make it a thing. $940. I knew what those men made. I knew what that number represented on a steelworker's wage, with a mortgage and kids and car insurance and the rest of it. Bruno. You ran 3 grievances back-to-back in 2009 when Kowalski's foreman was writing up guys for nonsense, he said. You drove Pete Marsden's wife to his funeral when Pete's own brothers didn't show. You're not allowed to say no. He turned and walked back down my front steps before I could argue. I stood in my doorway and looked at the 2 envelopes on my kitchen table, my daughter's tips, my brother's, from the floor. Between them, more than $2,000. Not enough to cover the full prescription, but enough to know that I was not standing in this alone. My son had still not called back. I filled the prescription. I started treatment. I went home and sat with my financial paperwork, the way I've always done when something doesn't add up. 35 years in a union teaches you to read documents slowly and assume nothing. That's when I found it. The home equity line of credit on my house. The HELOC I'd taken out 12 years earlier for a new roof and some foundation work had a credit limit of $90,000. According to the latest statement from TD, the outstanding balance was $52,411. I had not touched that account in 4 years. The last draw I could account for was $8,000 for a hot water tank. I'd paid it back in 6 months. I called the bank. The representative walked me through the withdrawal history with the careful manner of someone delivering news they've delivered before. 4 separate draws. February 2021, August 2022, November 2023. I hadn't made a single one. Is there another signatory on the account? She asked. There was. A few years after Marie died, my son had sat at this same kitchen table and explained that, given my age and the nature of my work, it would be sensible to have a durable power of attorney in place. A precaution. He drafted it himself and told me it was for healthcare decisions in case I was ever incapacitated. I signed without reading every clause, because he was a lawyer, and because he was my son. The POA had been drafted broadly enough to cover financial decisions as well. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. Outside, the maple in my backyard had gone the deep red it goes every October, right before the leaves drop. Marie planted that tree the year we moved in. She used to say it looked like it was on fire when the season turned. I thought I understood what she meant now. I called an old union contact who did legal aid referrals. She gave me a name. Agnes Whitfield had a small office above a bakery on James Street North. She was 55, with reading glasses on a chain and a manner that wasted nothing. She listened to everything I told her and took notes in a spiral-bound notebook without interrupting once. The power of attorney was signed in good faith for healthcare purposes, she said when I finished, using it to authorize financial transactions that were never disclosed to you, and that benefited your son directly, is a breach of fiduciary duty. In Ontario, that can constitute fraud. For a lawyer, it's professional misconduct reportable to the Law Society. How bad is his situation, actually, I asked. His real situation. It took her 2 weeks to find out. What she found was this. My son was not a junior partner. He was a senior associate with a conditional partnership offer that had not been confirmed, contingent on performance metrics he was not currently meeting. His personal debt included a $680,000 mortgage on the Liberty Village condo, a $340,000 mortgage on the Muskoka cottage, and over $40,000 in personal line of credit debt accumulated across 3 years. Elena's catering business had not turned a profit since its second year of operation. The $52,000 drawn from my equity had been used to service his personal debt and fund the down payment on the cottage. He had built the appearance of success the way some men build facades, all surface, nothing behind it. The day I received Agnes's report, I drove myself to the Juravinsky for a treatment session. I sat in the chair for 4 hours and watched the IV do what it needed to do, and I thought about a Sunday in August 1998, when my son was 17 and had wanted to quit his hardware store job because the manager was difficult. I'd sat with him on these same back steps and told him that the measure of a man wasn't what he did when things were easy. He'd rolled his eyes the way 17-year-olds do. I'd thought it had stuck eventually. I came home from the clinic feeling the way treatment makes you feel, hollowed out, unreliable on your legs. I made it as far as the kitchen before they gave out. My neighbor Arnie found me on the floor 20 minutes later. He'd come to return a socket wrench I'd lent him, and the front door was unlocked. He called 911 and then called my daughter, in that order, which was exactly the right order. The paramedics said it was a cardiac arrhythmia. Stress-induced, they believed, possibly compounded by the treatment. They kept me at Hamilton General for 4 nights. My daughter was there within the hour. Ivy dropped at a neighbor's. She stayed until 2 in the morning the first night, went home to get Ivy to school, and was back by 9. She ate a granola bar for dinner one of those evenings because she'd forgotten to bring anything else and wouldn't leave to get food. My son received 3 calls from her across those 4 days. He returned the third, 2 days in. I heard his voice through the phone she'd left on my hospital tray. "What do you want me to do, Hazel? I'm in the middle of a file. I can't just get on the go and come down for what amounts to a checkup." It wasn't a checkup, my daughter said. Quiet, precise, the way Marie used to get when she was holding something large and still. "I'll try to come on the weekend," he said. He did not come on the weekend. I was discharged on a Thursday. Agnes called that evening. "I've prepared the documents," she said. "When do you want to do this?" I thought about Bruno in the envelope. I thought about my daughter's tips, folded in 1s and 5s. I thought about the maple tree. "I want the Union Hall," I said. "I want witnesses." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you certain you don't want this to be a private conversation?" "I'm certain," I said. "Some things need to be seen." Bruno didn't ask questions when I called. He said he'd make some calls. That was enough. Before I tell you what happened at Local 1005 on that Tuesday evening in November, type 7 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And a reminder, what follows contains some fictional elements. If you'd rather stop here, that's completely all right. 43 men came to the Union Hall that night. Retired steelworkers, some still active. A few who'd moved into other trades after the layoffs of the 2000s. Men in their 50s and 60s who knew what the floor smelled like at 6 in the morning. Who knew what a body costs over decades of that kind of work. Who understood in their bones what it meant when someone showed up for you. My daughter sat near the back. Agnes had her documents arranged on the folding table in precise stacks. The hall smelled the way it always had, old coffee, industrial cleaner, the particular staleness of a building that had absorbed 40 years of difficult conversations. My son arrived at 7:10. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He looked around the room with the expression of a man who has entered somewhere he was not expecting to be. He saw me. He saw the room. I kept his voice steady. "What is this?" "Sit down, son." He sat. Bruno stood at the front without ceremony. "I've known Cliff Tanner for 23 years. I've worked beside him, eaten lunch with him, watched him drive men to their appointments on his own days off, and never mention it to anyone. When he needed help, this fall, 40 men in this room gave what they could. Because that's what you do. You show up. He looked at my son. We heard you didn't. My son said nothing. Agnes walked through the HELOC withdrawals methodically. The dates, the amounts, the document granting access, the scope of the power of attorney versus the use it had been put to. She explained what that meant under Ontario law. She explained what it meant for a licensed lawyer under Law Society guidelines. She used plain language and did not editorialize. My son's face moved through several things. Denial first, then calculation, then something that I believe was genuine shame. It arrived late, but it arrived. My daughter stood up. She held her phone, banking app open, 3 months of deposits and withdrawals visible. $1,100, she said. Every tip I didn't spend saved over 3 months. Because Dad was short on a cancer prescription that you could have covered with one weekend at your cottage. She set the phone down. I'm not saying this to make you feel small. I'm saying it so you understand what $1,100 looks like when you're cleaning offices at 9 at night with a 9-year-old at home. My son put his face in his hands. Agnes laid out 2 options. The first, my son would repay the $52,000 drawn from my HELOC on a payment plan arranged through her office, sell the Muskoka property to cover the principal, and voluntarily disclose to the Law Society of Ontario that he had exceeded the scope of the power of attorney he had drafted. He would also establish a monthly contribution of $500 toward my out-of-pocket medical costs until the ODB approved the prescription. The second, I would file a formal complaint with the Law Society, report the financial transactions to Hamilton Police's Financial Crimes Unit, and pursue civil recovery through the courts. His conditional partnership offer, which required good standing, would be withdrawn. His certificate to practice law would be at serious risk. The room was quiet enough that I could hear rain on the hall's flat roof. My son looked up. His eyes were red. I don't think I had seen him cry since he was a boy, and even then he'd always tried to stop himself before it showed. I told myself it was temporary, he said, that I'd pay it back before you noticed, that the partnership would come through and I'd fix everything quietly before it mattered. He looked at his hands. I kept telling myself it wasn't really. I don't know. I convinced myself of a lot of things that weren't true. Which option, I said. He chose the first. He said it quietly, and he didn't negotiate. Bruno gave a single nod. Across the room, men exhaled the way men exhale when something difficult has been met and not run from. The Muskoka cottage sold in January. The repayment plan started in February. My son reported the matter to the Law Society as agreed. His conditional partnership offer was placed on hold pending their review. He transferred to a smaller firm in Oakville. Lower profile, shorter commute, less performance to pretend to. He and Elena separated. He rented a 1-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of the city. He drove to Hamilton the first Sunday of every month after that. Sometimes we sat in the kitchen with CBC radio on and didn't say much. Sometimes he took Ivy to the park while my daughter and I had tea. It was not easy, and it was not fast, and there were conversations that cost both of us something real to get through. But he showed up. Month by month, that became the thing he learned how to do. My prescription came off private pay in April when ODB added the drug to the formulary. By July, my oncologist used the word remission. It is a word that changes the weight of a room when you hear it applied to yourself. Agnes helped me establish a small fund through Local 1005. The Marie Tanner Fund, named for my wife, to provide modest assistance to steelworkers and their families facing uncovered medical costs. The first check went to a man on the number 2 line whose daughter needed a hearing device that OHIP didn't cover. The second went to a widow whose husband had died of occupational lung disease and left her with bills the pension hadn't anticipated. It's not a large fund, it's enough. Last Saturday morning, I drove Ivy to her hockey practice. She plays recreational now, with secondhand skates and a helmet that's a size too big and the absolute conviction of a 9-year-old who has decided she loves something. She got in the truck, buckled her seatbelt, and said, "Grandpa, did you ever play hockey?" "I skated," I said, "badly." "Me too," she said, "but I like it anyway." I watched her run into the arena, and I thought about Marie, who would have liked that kid enormously. And I thought about my son, who had called that morning just to ask how I was feeling and whether I needed anything from the store. And I thought about Bruno, who still stops by every few weeks with something from his wife's garden and no particular agenda other than being there. I've come to believe, though it took me longer than it should have, that the people who matter most are not always the ones who arrived first. Some of them came through the side door at 9 at night with a uniform still on and an envelope in their hands. Some of them came through the front door of a union hall on a Tuesday evening in the rain. because someone they knew needed witnesses. It's not blood that makes you family. It's who shows up when you can't stand on your own. For a while there, I couldn't stand on my own. And when I counted who was in the room, really counted, I found that I had more family than I'd realized and less than I'd assumed. That's worth knowing before you need it. If this story moved you in some way, I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever found support somewhere you didn't expect to find it? Have you watched someone you love lose their way and then find their way back? Your stories matter. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today, and subscribe if you'd like to stay connected. Thank you for being here until the end.